Reporting from Arkham Asylum, this is Gotham Rogues. In this video we count down the top 5 Batman villains who should appear in the movies. If we really think about it, us Bat-Rogue fans have been pretty lucky. Compared to other Rogues galleries, the Batman villains have gotten quite a lot of coverage in live-action films. I mean, just look at the Superman movies. Who do we have in those? General Zod, Doomsday, Lex Luthor, Lex Luthor, Lex Luthor, Lex Luthor, and some more Lex Luthor. What about Bizarro, Brainiac, Metallo, the Parasite? These are all classic and major Superman rogues who's got zero representation in film. Luckily, it's not like that in the Batman movies. They don't just keep on rehashing the Joker over and over, at least not yet. Still, one can get greedy, and I'd like you all to indulge me as I list an additional 5 Bat-Rogues that I really want in the movies. These are only villains who haven't appeared in a live-action movie yet. I am thinking about doing a video where I list 5 villains whose film adaptations wasn't necessarily all that flattering, and who deserve a second chance, or maybe third. By the way, let me know in the comments which Batman villains you want to see adapted for the big screen, and possibly also how. Anyway, let's get on with the video. Number 5. Hugo Strange. Good old Hugo is a pretty underrated character, which is a shame considering that if you don't count the really obscure villains like Dr. Death and the Mad Monk, Strange was Batman's first proper rogue. I can't kind of understand why he's overlooked though. I mean, the guy looks pretty generic and bland. He's basically just a bald dude with a beard and glasses. Strange doesn't exactly stand out when you put him next to the likes of Joker and Two-Face. That doesn't mean he's not a good character though. He's actually quite fascinating. Hugo is a psychological threat to Batman and is a master at messing with Bruce's mind, maybe even more so than the Scarecrow. For a movie, I think there's 2 ways you can do Strange. Option 1, you adapt the classic mad scientist version, complete with his giant mutant monster men. Such a film would obviously be pretty fantastical, and I'd like it to have a very gothic and macabre style, basically like the Tim Burton movies. Maybe Hugo could be a doctor at Arkham Asylum who experiments on the patients, using them to create his monster men. This way one of the inmates could serve as a secondary villain, and you'd also get plenty of cool villain cameos. Now don't get me wrong, this would not be my ultimate Arkham movie, which I spoke about in a previous video. Option 2. You loosely adapt the Legends of the Dark Knight arc Prey. In that comic, Hugo was reimagined as a psychologist who was hired by the police to deduce Batman's true identity. Of course, Strange himself was completely off his rocker. He became obsessed with Batman. He even began to desire to actually be Batman. A movie like that would obviously have a far more realistic and gritty tone, more akin to the Christopher Nolan films. Both of these options would cast Hugo as the main villain, which is the only way I'd like it. Hugo is no one's patsy, and there would be room for a secondary villain in both as well. Number 4. Man-Bat. Who doesn't think that a giant flying bat creature would be awesome to see on the big screen? The character is inherently cinematic. We've been teased with a live-action Man-Bat twice, so why not make it happen for real already? The teases I'm referring to is that giant bat monster from that deleted Batman Forever scene. It's on YouTube if you haven't seen it. Just search Batman Forever Giant Bat or something like that. Then there's that dream sequence in Batman vs Superman where a giant bat monster appears out of the Wayne's tomb. I really doubt the filmmakers were thinking of Man-Bat when they made these scenes, but they do work as examples of how a live-action Man-Bat might look. In a previous video, one of you guys, called that Comic Geek, suggested in the comments a creature feature Batman movie that would be a loose adaptation of the original Man-Bat trilogy from the early 70s. I absolutely love that idea, a smaller scale horror tragedy that focused on Man-Bat, Francine, and Batman, without any side distractions. There definitely is enough meat there to make a feature film, so it could easily work. I don't think it's really the type of Batman movie the studio heads want though. They want something more mainstream and commercial, so sadly I doubt we'll ever get such a film. Back in the late 90s, or maybe it was the early 2000s, there was a script for a sequel to Batman and Robin called Batman Dark Knight. The story featured Man-Bat and Scarecrow as the villains. Kirk Langstrom and Jonathan Crane were depicted as professors at Hudson University, I believe, the university that Dick Grayson studies at. Crane was to be the main villain and use his hapless colleague Kirk in experiments that eventually turned him into Man-Bat. I think this actually sounds really good, and parts of that script should be used for a future Batman movie movie in my opinion. This way we might get great depictions of both Man-Bat and Scarecrow. Kirk would be portrayed as a tragic villain, an innocent man turned into a monster against his will, and Crane would be depicted as the sinister, formidable master villain he's always deserved to be. Number 3. Mad Hatter. Jervis Tetch is one of the last of the original classic rogues from the 40s who still hasn't been featured in a live-action movie. I don't think that's strange though, because how would you sell a movie where Batman goes up against a Mad Hatter character from Alice in Wonderland? I certainly have no clue. I mean, sure, us fans would go see it, but I'm talking about the general public. How do you convince them that it's not just an April Fool's joke? I guess the only way to really do it is to make Jervis the secondary villain and not market the movie with him. I see before me a plot where Black Mask or the Penguin, or hell, maybe even the Joker, hires Tetch to create this mind control technology for them. In return, he's given a playground of his own, where Tetch is able to reenact scenes from the Wonderland books, complete with slaves who plays the roles. He shouldn't be portrayed as a sinister character though, but as just completely delusional, who doesn't even really understand that these people don't want to be there. I also think that the Hatter would be ideal for my Ultimate Arkham movie. His mind control technology alongside Poison Ivy's pheromones could be how the inmate sees and maintain control of the asylum. This way he'd be instrumental in the takeover, but he wouldn't be a main focus. I actually feel that this is the best way to adapt Jervis for a movie, or the most plausible I should say. The general public wouldn't have any problems buying this character if he's part of a whole group of colorful loons. I mean, you kind of expect bizarre kooks in a movie about an insane asylum. Sure, I would love a surreal, heavily stylized movie where the Hatter tries to make Gotham City into his own private wonderland, but I'm not going to kid myself. The odds of such a movie being made are slim to none. I think we're going to have to settle with a supporting role, or at the most a secondary villain. It's a hell of a lot better than nothing though. Number 2. Black Mask. Out of all the characters on this list, Roman Sionis aka the Black Mask is definitely one who's the most easy to adapt for a live-action film. He's just so versatile. You can make him the main villain as easily as he can be a secondary antagonist. He'd fit in a fantastical and stylized movie as easily as he'd belong in a realistic and grounded one. You can go with the classic take, where Roman was obsessed with masks and the idea that people hide their true faces in public by wearing metaphorical masks. Or you can adapt the modern, skull-faced version, where he's just a really evil guy who loves torture. Both would work equally well in a movie. Personally, I'd prefer the former alternative though, as that's my Black Mask. I've never cared much for the black-red skull torture depiction. I'll get into that more though when I finally make some Black Mask videos. Anyway, Trey Walden suggested a good idea in the comments of an earlier video. A movie where Roman is the guy who disfigures Harvey Dent. Trey, you must be reading my mind, because I've also had that same idea. Black Mask is actually the perfect candidate to scar Dent. That is if you do the old school take on Sionis. Somehow he could be made aware of Harvey's dark side, prompting Roman to grow obsessed with unleashing it. So that's why he disfigures Dent, not to simply get revenge like Moroni, but to conjure up the true Harvey Dent as he would see it. This idea is also similar to Greg Rucka's take on Black Mask in No Man's Land. There, Roman had abandoned his masks and instead started using disfigurement as a means to show one's true face, forcing all of his goons to horribly scar themselves. In another video I also talked about a smaller scale movie, similar in style to the Dredd movie starring Karl Urban. One plot idea I had for such a film was Batman getting caught in the middle of a brutal gang war between Roman and the Penguin. This is another option for a potentially great Black Mask movie that could really feature either of the two versions of the character. You could of course also make a film that details the rise and fall of Roman Sionis, exploring his past with Bruce Wayne. There's just so many options. Unlike the Mad Hatter, I think Black Mask is a very marketable character. He's got a good and intimidating visual design that suggests a powerful foe who is in no way goofy. The Dark Knight Rises was marketed with Bane, even though no one in the general public knew who he was, and that turned out to be a success, so I don't see why it wouldn't work with Sionis. There are some rumors going around that Black Mask is going to be the antagonist in the Gotham City Sirens movie. That's not an idea I would have thought of, but it's got the potential to be good, so let's hope it turns out to be true. And now for the Bat-Rogue who needs a live-action movie adaptation the most. Number 1. Clayface. Yeah, who did you expect? Killer Moth? Don't you think it's strange that despite there being so many Clayfaces, not a single one of them have appeared in a movie? I think it's only a matter of time though. Clayface is another classic rogue from the 40s, and I'd say that he, or they, or whatever, are more iconic than the Hatter. Clayface is also a fan favorite, which old Jervis may not necessarily be. Because of this, Clayface feels like the most likely out of the characters on this list to receive a movie adaptation, and he really does need it. So what kind of Clayfaces could you do in a movie? The easiest but probably most boring way would be to go with Matt Hagen, or a Basil Karlo who's written like Hagen, which he often is in the comics. Put him in the role of the secondary antagonist, working for the main villain, acting mainly as a tough opponent for Batman to defeat. Basically just make him a special effect, included in the movie simply to show off his shape-shifting powers in cool action scenes. I think this could work really well if the effects are good, and it would certainly draw an audience. This feels like something the studio heads would love, so I think that this is what we're going to get when Clayface finally appears in a movie. It's not quite what I want though, and probably not really what most of you want either. I'd prefer a proper Basil Karlo on the big screen, who's portrayed as a theatrical actor and not a cheap thug. He doesn't really need to be the main villain though, he could still be the secondary antagonist. Perhaps instead of working for the big bad guy in return for a paycheck, Karlo could have been promised to be made into a star once again. Or whoever the main villain is could claim to hold a cure for Basil's condition. That way you'd go with a sympathetic portrayal of Clayface, who doesn't want to be a pile of mud. Maybe this would fit in with my Hugo Strange Arkham movie, and Strange could be the one offering the cure, in favor of Karlo doing something related to Hugo's Monster Man experiments. I'd also love a horror movie where Preston Payne, the third Clayface, stalks the streets of Gotham, melting innocent citizens in dark alleyways, but I know that's never gonna happen. So there you have it. Those are the 5 Bat-Rogues I'd like to see in the movies. Which ones do you want to see? Write it down in the comments. And if you got plot ideas to go with them, write those down as well. Remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.